Have you ever imagined facing a warrior who was almost 3 meters tall, completely covered in armor? What if I told you that in the Bible, there were not one but 2 giants like this, so fearsome that they made even entire armies tremble with fear? Get ready for an epic journey through the sacred pages, where we will discover how God used the unlikely to defeat the seemingly invincible. Our journey begins in the desert, where the Israelites, recently freed from slavery in Egypt, faced their first giant, Og, king of Bashan. Imagine the scene. A people who had spent generations in captivity, now faced with a king whose bed was more than 4 meters long. The Bible gives us fascinating details about Og in Deuteronomy 3:11, for only Og, king of Bashan, was left of the Rephaim. Behold, his bed, a bed of iron, is not among the children of Ammon. 9 cubits is the length thereof, and 4 cubits the breadth thereof, after the common cubit. This verse not only gives us an idea of Og's impressive size, but also reveals how his fame spread to the point that his bed was preserved as a relic. Og was not only great in stature, but also in power. He ruled over 60 fortified cities, each protected by high walls, gates, and bars. Imagine the terror that gripped the Israelites when they faced such an adversary. How could a people with no military experience defeat a giant who ruled over such a vast and fortified kingdom? But here is the first powerful lesson. The size of the challenge does not matter when God is on our side. The Lord told Moses in Numbers 21:34, "Do not fear him, for I have given him and all his people and his land into your hand." This promise certainly seemed almost unbelievable to the Israelites, but God was about to demonstrate that his word always comes true. Interestingly, this was not the first time God had given such an assurance to his people. Prior to the battle against Og, the Israelites had already faced and defeated Sihon, king of the Amorites, with a similar promise from God. This previous experience should have strengthened the people's faith, but facing a giant like Og still presented a formidable challenge. The repetition of God's promise at this critical moment reminds us that he is patient with our doubts and fears, always ready to give us assurance and confidence. The battle that followed was nothing short of spectacular. Despite all of Og's strength and defenses, the Israelites, led by Moses and strengthened by God's promise, won a sweeping victory. Deuteronomy 3:3-7 gives us a vivid description of the outcome. "So the Lord our God also gave Og king of Bashan and all his people into our hands, and we defeated them until there was none left. At that time we captured all his cities. There was not a city that we did not capture. 60 cities, the whole region of Argob, as we had done to Sihon king of Heshbon, utterly destroying all his cities, women and children. But all the livestock and the spoil of the cities we took as plunder." This detailed description serves not only as a historical record, but also as a testimony to the complete victory that God granted to his people. The specific mention of the 60 fortified cities emphasizes the magnitude of the triumph, showing that no human defense, no matter how impressive, can withstand the power of God when he acts on behalf of his people. This victory was not just a military triumph, but a living testimony to the power of God and his faithfulness to his promises. Imagine the impact this had on the faith and courage of the Israelites. A people who, not long before, had feared even returning to Egypt in the face of hardship, had now defeated one of the most fearsome kings in the region. The conquest of Bashan became a landmark in Israel's history, often recalled in the Psalms and elsewhere as an example of God's liberating power. For example, Psalm 135:10-12 states, "He struck down many nations and killed mighty kings, Sihon, king of the Amorites, and Og, king of Bashan, and all the kingdoms of Canaan, and gave their land as an inheritance to his people Israel." This memory would serve as a beacon of hope and confidence for future generations, reminding them that with God, no obstacle is insurmountable. The victory over Og not only removed the threat posed by Og was not limited to merely removing an immediate obstacle, but also paved the way for the conquest of the Promised Land. Bashan, a fertile and strategically vital region located east of the Jordan River, was conquered by the Israelites, providing them with a solid base for future campaigns west of the Jordan. Furthermore, defeating a king as powerful and feared as Og likely sent shockwaves throughout Canaan, striking fear into the hearts of the other peoples the Israelites would face. This is evident in Joshua 2:10, when Rahab, the prostitute of Jericho, addresses the Israelite spies, saying, "For we have heard how the Lord dried up the waters of the Red Sea before you when you came out of Egypt, and what you did to the two kings of the Amorites, Sihon and Og, who were beyond the Jordan, whom you utterly destroyed." This passage reveals how the fame of Israel's victories, including the defeat of Og, spread, fulfilling God's promise to put the fear of Israel upon the peoples, according to Deuteronomy 2:25. But the story does not stop there. Centuries later, the Israelites would face another giant, perhaps even more intimidating than Og. His name was Goliath, and he would emerge as the champion of the Philistines, the enemies of Israel, in the time of King Saul. The scenario for this new battle could not be more different. Instead of the desert and fortified cities of Bazan, we now have the valley of Elah, a fertile region in the hill country of Judah. The political and military context had also changed dramatically. No longer a nomadic people fresh from Egypt, but a settled nation with its own king. However, despite all these changes, the challenge of trusting God in the face of a seemingly invincible enemy still persisted. Goliath was an imposing sight, as described in the Bible in 1 Samuel 17:4-7. Then a warrior came out from the camp of the Philistines named Goliath from Gath, his height being 6 cubits and a span. He wore a bronze helmet on his head, a coat of scales weighing 5,000 shekels of bronze greaves on his legs, and a bronze javelin between his shoulders. The shaft of his spear was like a weaver's beam, and the head of his spear weighed 600 shekels of iron, and his shield-bearer went before him. Let's pause to reflect on these measurements. 6 cubits and a span are equivalent to approximately 90 meters. The armor he wore weighed about 57 ki, more than many adults. His spear, described as a weaver's shaft, had an iron tip that weighed about 7 kilo. Goliath was not just a giant, but a true walking fortress. For 40 days he defied the armies of Israel, mocking them and their God. 1 Samuel 17:8-10 records their mocking words. "Why have you come out to set up your battle array? Am I not a Philistine, and you servants of Saul? Choose a man from among you who will come down to me. If he is able to fight with me and smite me, then we will be his servants. But if I overcome him and strike him, then you will be our servants and serve us." He added, "Today I challenge the troops of Israel. Give me a man so we can both fight." Imagine the devastating impact this had on the morale of the Israeli troops. Every morning and evening for more than a month they were reminded of their apparent inferiority to this Philistine colossus. Fear spread like a plague through the camp. The situation was so serious that 1 Samuel 17:11 tells us, "When Saul and all Israel heard these words of the Philistine, they were terrified and greatly afraid." It was in this desperate scenario that an unlikely hero entered the scene. David, a young shepherd. His introduction into the narrative is made in a seemingly casual manner, since he was not on the battlefield but at home, tending his father's sheep. It was only when his father sent him to carry supplies to his brothers in the army that David was faced with the situation. 1 Samuel 17:20-22 tells us, "David got up early in the morning, left the sheep with a keeper, took the load and set out as Gesher had ordered. He arrived at the trench when the army was coming out in battle formation and shouting war cries. Israel and the Philistines lined up, line against line. David left the load in the care of those who were guarding the baggage, ran to the ranks, arrived and greeted his brothers." This scene highlights the contrast between David and experienced soldiers. While they were preparing for battle with war cries, David had just arrived, as a simple messenger, oblivious to the terror that gripped the camp. When all the seasoned warriors were paralyzed by fear, this young man, driven by unshakable faith, volunteered to face Goliath. David's reaction to Goliath's challenge is recorded in 1 Samuel 17:26, where he says, "What will be done to the man who kills this Philistine and takes away the reproach from Israel? Who is this uncircumcised Philistine that he should defy the armies of the living God?" Note how David's perspective was completely different from that of the soldiers. While they saw an invincible giant, David saw only an uncircumcised Philistine who dared to defy the living God. This difference in perspective is crucial to understanding David's courage. His confidence was not in his own strength or ability, but in the faithfulness and power of God. David's offer to fight Goliath was initially met with skepticism and even mockery. His own brother Eliab accused him of arrogance and irresponsibility. When King Saul finally allowed David to face Goliath, he tried to clothe him in his own armor, a well-intentioned gesture that demonstrated a lack of understanding of the true source of David's strength. David's refusal to wear armor, recorded in 1 Samuel 17:39, was not just a matter of physical comfort, but an assertion of faith. He was trusting not in human protection but in divine protection. David's words to Saul in 1 Samuel 17:37 sum up his confidence. "The Lord who rescued me from the paw of the lion and from the paw of the bear, he will rescue me from the hand of this Philistine." Then Saul said to David, "Go, and the Lord be with you." The confrontation between David and Goliath is one of the most dramatic and inspiring moments in biblical history. David's words as he approached Goliath have echoed down through the centuries. "You come to me with sword and spear and javelin, but I come to you in the name of the Lord Almighty, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied. This very day the Lord will deliver you into my hand. I will strike you down and take your head off. This very day I will give the carcasses of the Philistine army to the birds of the air and to the beasts of the earth, and all the earth will know that there is a God in Israel." 1 Samuel 17:45-46. This statement is not just a demonstration of courage, but a profession of faith. David understood that the battle was not just between him and Goliath, but an opportunity for God to show his power to all nations. What happened next was one of the most unexpected and decisive moments in the history of Israel. Armed with only a sling and 5 smooth stones, David faced the giant. 1 Samuel 17:49-50 describes the outcome. David reached into his bag and took out a stone, slung it, and struck the Philistine in the forehead. The stone stuck in his forehead, and he fell face down on the ground. Thus David prevailed over the Philistine with a sling and a stone, and struck the Philistine down and killed him, even though David did not have a sword in his hand. This moment not only decided the battle, but also dramatically demonstrated that true strength lies not in physical strength or weaponry, but in faith and trust in God. Goliath's fall with a single well-aimed stone was not just a stroke of luck, but a tangible manifestation of God's power working through a faithful servant. David's victory over Goliath was not just a personal triumph, but a decisive turning point in the history of Israel. It marked the beginning of David's rise as leader and future king, and it served as a powerful testimony to God's power to accomplish the impossible through those who trust in him. The immediate impact of this victory is described in 1 Samuel 17:51-53. Then David ran and stood over the Philistine, took his sword, drew it from its sheath, killed him, and cut off his head. When the Philistines saw that their champion was dead, they fled. Then the men of Israel and Judah rose up and shouted, and pursued them to the mouth of the valley and to the gates of Ekron. The wounded of the Philistines fell along the road from Sarai to Gath and all the way to Ekron. Goliath's defeat not only eliminated the immediate threat, but it also inspired the entire army of Israel to pursue and defeat the Philistines, turning what could have been a humiliating defeat into a resounding victory. These two stories, separated by centuries, share profound themes that continue to resonate to this day. Both demonstrate that the giants in our lives, whether they are challenges, fears, or adversaries, may seem insurmountable at first glance, but when we trust God and act in faith, we realize that no obstacle is too great. On the other hand, the story of David and Goliath shows us that God often chooses the unlikely to accomplish his purposes. David was not a trained warrior but a young shepherd boy. Yet his faith and courage made him the hero Israel needed at that time. This encourages us not to underestimate our potential when we are aligned with God's purposes. As Paul wrote in 1 Corinthians 1:27-29, "But God chose the foolish things of the world to shame the wise. He chose the weak things of the world to shame the strong. He chose the base things of the world and the despised things, and the things that are nothing, to bring to nothing the things that are, so that no one may boast in his presence. This truth reminds us that God can use any of us, regardless of our apparent limitations, to accomplish his purposes and glorify his name. Both stories also highlight the importance of trusting in God's resources, not our own. The Israelites would have stood no chance against Og, relying only on their own strength, just as David could not defeat Goliath with conventional weapons. It was trusting in God's power that made the difference. This challenges us to reconsider how we approach our own challenges. Are we trusting in our own abilities or in God's infinite strength? The Apostle Paul captured this truth in 2 Corinthians 12:9-10 when he wrote, "But he said to me, My grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. Therefore I will boast all the more gladly about my weaknesses, so that the power of Christ may rest upon me. Therefore for Christ's sake I delight in weaknesses, in insults, in hardships, in persecutions, in distresses, for when I am weak, then I am strong." Ultimately, these stories teach us about the true nature of courage. Courage is not the absence of fear, but the willingness to act in spite of it. Both Moses and David certainly felt fear in the face of their respective giants, but they chose to act based on trust in God, in their faith, not in their fears. This encourages us to confront our own apprehensions with the confidence that God is on our side. As Joshua 1 reminds us, "I have not commanded you. Be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid or discouraged, for the Lord your God will be with you wherever you go." These stories encourage us to develop courage based not on our own strength, but on the assurance of God's presence and power in our lives. They invite us to take steps of faith, trusting that just as God was with Moses and David, he is also with us, ready to empower us to face any challenge that comes our way.